thoughts now of market strategist David Kuo of Smart Investor, joining us now live from Singapore. David, great to have you with us. Let's take a look at inflation, which has been rearing its ugly head here in the Philippines now for a second straight month. Higher rice and fuel prices pushing that number to 6.1% from 5.3%. Is this a concern for you as a market investor?
Oh, most definitely. You know, Rico, I am reminded by that Wet, Wet, Wet song, the one that says love is everywhere. But this one is inflation is all around us, Rico. And it is so difficult to try and tamp down inflation. And if you believe that inflation is caused by too much money chasing a limited supply of goods, then it means that central banks have to take away that oversupply of money. There is just too much cash around chasing a limited supply of goods. And when that happens, you get inflation. And inflation can pop up anywhere. At the moment in the Philippines, it's all about rice.
Right.
Another time, it could be about onions. Another time, it could be about chili in India. And that is the problem that we have. Too much money swirling around the global economy, Rico.
But is this problem that is taking place here in the Philippines of 6.1% also a problem for other ASEAN economies?
Well, the average inflation for the ASEAN, the 10 ASEAN countries is about 6.5%. And so therefore, Philippines is slap bang in the middle. But at the same time, you have to remember that there are some economies within ASEAN, for instance, Laos and Myanmar, for instance. I mean, they're experiencing inflation in the 20s. So you're talking about 20% inflation in those two economies. Then you have Thailand that has inflation at 0.1%, which is almost no inflation whatsoever. So it's a pretty broad church as far as inflation is concerned. But what you cannot afford to do is to take your eye off the ball. If you think, oh, I've managed to lick inflation, I've beaten inflation, I can now relax, suddenly it just comes back up. And just as you said, it just rears its ugly head and you think, my goodness, what am I going to do now? Central banks start scrambling, they start increasing interest rates. And so inflation is a problem until they start withdrawing all of that money that they created, first of all, after the great financial crisis, and then secondly, after COVID, because trillions of dollars were printed, trillions of dollars were created out of thin air, and now they're trying to find some way of taking it all back again without causing any huge problems.
All right. Of course, it creates huge problems in terms of economic growth. We've seen the Philippine economy fall from its 7+% expansion of 2022 down to the 5% level. So the central bank, how should it act, especially the Bangko Sentral, which is the local central bank? How should they act at their next meeting? They've kept the cost of borrowing, David, at 6.25%. But now, with 2 consecutive months of rising prices, should they start moving again?
I think they have no choice but to move again. If you have a look at the headline rate, it's running at about 6.1%. If you look at the interest rate, it's about 6.25%. And at the moment, it's kind of in balance. But if inflation starts to rise again, then the central banks have no choice but to increase interest rates. Because the only way you can control inflation is to keep the interest rates above the rate of inflation. If you don't do that, then of course you have a problem. And the same problem is being faced by central banks everywhere in the world. It's not just the Philippine Central Bank. The Fed has the same problem. The Bank of England, the Bank of Japan, everybody has the same problem. And what they're trying to do is to think, what do I need to control? Do I need to control inflation or do I need to actually drive economic growth? They can't do both at the same time, Rico. That is the dilemma they have. If they cut interest rates in order to drive economic growth, then inflation will take off. If they try and sort of raise interest rates to try and sort of keep inflation down, then the economy will suffer. But I think the answer is you cannot get the economy growing again until you control inflation. And that, I think, is going to be the mantra throughout all the central banks around the world, apart from those who think, I've managed to beat inflation now, I don't need to do any more. And that is when they make the big mistake. That is when inflation will come back again. And it will come back with such a vengeance, Rico, that they will have to increase interest rates even more than they had hoped for in the very beginning.
All right.
So maybe it might be best to keep keep control of inflation, Rico. That's the only choice they have.
That is the holistic view of how you're seeing inflation. But David, you also have to take a look at the problems domestically here in the Philippines, because not only are we seeing rising prices, but that is also connected with issues about the big private traders. I mean, you also have to take into consideration rice cartels, hoarders, and smugglers. I mean, of course, the Banco Central, the central bank, will have to address it potentially through maybe the currency or through monetary policy. But the national government of President Marcos also has to address these serious problems on the ground.
It doesn't help when you have hoarders. It doesn't help the situation at all. But unfortunately, what are you going to do? Are you going to legislate against, people hoarding rice? What quantity of rice do you keep, which is considered hoarding? I mean, if I was a household and I thought that rice prices was going to go up, I may actually buy 1, 2, or maybe 3 more kilos of rice than I actually need. Am I therefore going to be labeled as a hoarder simply because I want to actually sort of protect my family and to make sure that they have rice, at every meal without breaking the bank in order to go out and do it? That, I think, is the problem that you have. So the only recourse that they have is to, if you believe, Rico, if you believe that there is too much money chasing a limited supply of rice, then the only option you have is to try and reduce the amount of money that is available. If there is no money to go out and buy rice, then rice prices should fall again, Rico. And that is what you would call the holistic view, but that is also what I would call the economic or maybe the realistic view about prices. That if you have too much money chasing any item, let's forget about rice for a minute, Rico. Let's talk about a real asset like property. If there's too much money coming into an economy, going to buy condos, going to buy real estate, going to buy houses, property prices are going to go through the roof. And that is one of the problems that is being faced by many economies around the world. Young children, young people are being priced out of the property market because there is so much money being made available for rich people to go and buy property that young people just cannot get on the housing ladder, Rico. They cannot find anywhere to live. What are you going to do about that? Is that a result of people hoarding property? Or is it just people sort of saying, I need to find a safe place to park my money, so therefore I'm going to put it into real estate?
David, thank you so much. Lovely to see you again. Thank you so much for your insights. David Kuo, co-founder of The Smart Investor, joining us from Singapore.